All right, next we have that familiar speech community. So what does this mean? It's going to be the basis of your research for your project. A familiar speech community should be a social group that you belong to, aspire to belong to, or can identify with in some way, either by accepting that type of group or by rejecting and distancing yourself from that type of group. So if you are already particularly opinionated about the way certain groups of people use language, you can choose to evaluate a social group that you don't belong to. But it might be best to find a group that you do belong to so that you can speak really authoritatively on the subject. And then the group that you choose, so the speech community that you choose, should have a unique or particular speech habits. And they can range anywhere from standard, so like just standard language, to like alternative language, which is just a little bit more slang, a little bit more colloquial, or an anti-language, which is what Mac Halliday says as a type of language that is specifically set up to reject certain social norms. So when you're trying to pick your speech community, first consider what kinds of speech communities that you aspire to, belong to, or have belonged to in the past. So as I look at these examples, please take a couple of minutes in your personal notes to try and list one or two communities for each of these categories to get yourself thinking about where you might belong in the speech community realm. Social speech communities, so this could be on social media. You could do an evaluation of the jargon and the technical language involved in using different platforms of social media. Do you have certain language that you use only with your friend group? So do you guys talk in a way that's really different from other situations? Or do you have a specific language habits that you use with, your romantic partner? Or you can even evaluate culturally how we use language to talk about, romance and romantic partnership issues. Do you have a faith-based social community? So church or religion might have its own unique language habits that go along with it. For your work or profession, so that could be a speech community. For example, if you are interested in pursuing a career in law or even police enforcement, there's absolutely specific jargon and technical terms for that kind of community. The medical profession, political professions, other vocations, so other jobs and trades. Most jobs have a specific jargon. I've seen a couple of interesting papers coming from the students who are interested in police, firefighting, and culinary, also political science. So consider those types of speech communities. Recreation or leisure-based groups. So do you have like sports, video games, other type like skating? I've seen a really great paper sort of evaluating skater slang. That was fun to read. So do you have like a pastime that you enjoy or have enjoyed in the past that comes along with a lot of particular slang terms? A geographic speech community, so maybe thinking about Bay Area speech. I once read a really interesting paper that contrasted this student had moved from a different state into the Bay Area, and that student really evaluated and compared and contrasted the differences. I thought that was interesting. So if you have that kind of cultural context that you can bring into the paper by comparing and contrasting the way different regions of people use language, that could be a good place to start. Ethnic or heritage-based speech communities. So especially if there are like multilingual families or different traditions or maybe even like rituals or festivals that all come with their specific, maybe there's a song that's involved or a poem or a prayer. Those are language habits that might be able to reveal something about the values or ideals of a speech community. Time-based speech communities. So obviously we all live in the 21st century, but especially if we have any of our older students might compare and contrast the way slang words have changed over time. So maybe, you know, when you were a young kid, this is how people talked. Now this is how today's young people talk. Or if you're not an older student, but you're just sort of the average, 20-something-year-old student, you can look at the differences between the way your generation uses like slang terms and the way your parent or grandparent generation does so, or even the way like the children, like the middle school or high school range kids are using slang terms differently. So you can compare those generational differences, or any other speech communities. So as you're taking your notes, if you think of a different kind of speech community, share that in the replies so that we can all think along with you and sort of like build up many different possibilities. So I'll continue. I know this is going on, this post is a little longer, but I'll continue with this last bit for thinking about the speech habits of a familiar speech community. So after you think about which kind of speech community you want to analyze, consider the categories, styles, and examples of language that are used by that group. So here's a big list of types of language. As you continue brainstorming and jotting down your ideas, I will read this to you. So standard phrases that seem to be unmarked, slang, humor-based, phrases for specific goals or outcomes, phrases for arranging power structures or for indicating authority figures, or for equalizing power levels. So a lot of social activism, that kind of speech community might be really particularly interested in power structures. Language used to denote gender ideas or ideas about sexuality. Language to denote ideas about ethnicity or race. Language to denote ideas about class or social status. Enforcing ideas about religion, morality, or faith, referring to places or times, coded language that might hide criminal or illegal activity, formalized language such as prayers, speeches, oaths, etc., salutations, which are ways to say hello and goodbye, ways to offer condolence or congratulation to people, ways to accuse people of things or to defend yourself against being accused, ways to signify identifications with local or global places, current or past times. Language used to satire or lampoon or, make fun of. Language that is used to revere or honor or show respect toward. And then you might find a lot of good, meat, so to speak, by just looking at the verbs or the verb phrases and the nouns or the noun phrases of your of the lexicon of your speech community. So similarly to the way Benjamin Whorf talked about that a little bit in his paper. So that was a lot for thinking about our kind of main context for this paper, which is choosing and then thinking deeply about the familiar speech community. So please share your thoughts, your questions, your brainstorming ideas, your jumping off points in the replies below here.